All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to the Central Arkansas chapter for giving me the opportunity. This is a needed opportunity to talk to y'all because of some of the recent developments that have taken place with the training program. This will be a little bit of a different plan from what showed up in field notes a couple months ago, which is all about Locksburg Mounds, Locksburg Mounds. You notice now we have Holman Springs on the title slide, so that's it's been some changes. If I don't know you yet, my name is Dr. Carl Drexler. I'm the Arkansas Archaeological Survey's research station archaeologist in Magnolia. See a lot of friendly and familiar faces in the room, but for anyone who is not familiar with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, we are a unit of the University of Arkansas system, and we consist of 10 research stations scattered around the state. And we have a lot of our stations divide up Arkansas's 75 counties into station territories. So I'm the guy down here in Southwest Arkansas, housed at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia. And we do a lot of different things related to archaeology. And we work with a lot of different groups. And one of the groups that we're very fortunate to be able to work with is the Arkansas Archaeological Society, which is you guys. Or if you're not members yet, it's cheap and it's fun. Join in. So the survey is basically the state agency, and the society is a group of dedicated individuals who are very interested in Arkansas archaeology and archaeology in general. Some of them are professional, some of them are avocational. And we're very fortunate to be able to work together to put on throughout the year numerous different events, and these consist of volunteer things, everything from lab days to small digs. We have an annual meeting generally towards the end of September, and last year was online. We're looking to come back face to face this year. The society oversees Arkansas Archaeology Month earlier in the year, and we do monthly chapter talks like this one, and then generally during the summer we host what's called the training program, where we bring people together for a couple of weeks to teach them how to dig. And I say generally because it was like clockwork from the early 1960s until 2019, an annual event, and then the pandemic happened and it became a little less routine. So we are excited to be coming back to start this again. And the project I'm going to tell you about tonight follows on from our last training program, which took place in 2019. And it's easily recognizable in all the field photographs by the blazingly orange shirts that were the commemorative T-shirt for the event. And both of these events were very well, one will be significant additions to our understanding of Arkansas history and Caddo history as well. And so the context for what we started and what we're continuing this summer is, when we look at Arkansas, archaeologists tend to divide up Arkansas's history into different regions. And here in the Southwest, we work within what's called the Southwest section. And that Southwest section is largely the ancestral homeworld of the Caddo Nation, now headquartered in Bangor, Oklahoma. And we divide that Southwest section up into 7 subregions. And these are basically divisions that roughly correspond to divisions in artifact styles and ecological zones. Now, of these 7, the Felsenthal region, which you see here, is fairly heavily aligned to the lower Mississippi Valley, whereas artifactually, when we look at these other regions, they're part of what the late Frank Schambach styled as the Trans-Mississippi South. which is basically the portion of the vast forests that cover the eastern United States that were west of the Mississippi Valley and east of the Great Plains. And within that region, Frank and Ann Early and several other folks who specialize in Caddo prehistory authored short summaries of 5 of these 6 regions. And the one that we don't have such a document for is the Little River region shown here. And so that's the work that we've been doing has been working to fill in some of this, a gap in our knowledge. And so the Little River region is basically the area north of the Red River watershed and south of the Ouachitas. Sort of the main geographic divisions there. And when we started this work back in 2019, we were looking at 2 sites. So as you see in blue, that's the Little River region, and the black and the yellow dots are some of the known pre-contact sites in the region. The Locksburg mounds, we'll talk about a little bit first, and then we'll get into Holman Springs because that's what we're carrying through for this year. They're both very important sites with a lot of important things to tell us, but they're very different sites at the same time. They are on different watersheds. Locksburg Mounds is in the Cossatot River drainage. Holman Springs is on the Rolling Fork. But beyond that, they're the place that they occupied within Caddo history and Caddo society is very, very different. So when we look at Locksburg Mounds, it was probably the largest Native American site in the Little River region. It's been documented minimally to have 10 mounds, possibly as many as 13 times in the past. And it was centered around this large rectilinear mound called Mound A right in here. And this was a site that the few writings on the Little River region that are out there basically ignore because they weren't part of any of the early surveys of the area that took place back in the 1950s and 1970s. So this was a site that really wasn't in our conscious in terms of the landscape of Caddo mound centers. And so our research in 2019 was the first sort of systematic archaeology out there. And what we started off doing there was we laid out coming down the side of Mound A. You see Tim Mulvihill standing by the total station up at the top, Paul Knapp down at the bottom. There's the day we're laying out the grid. For those of y'all who know Clay Newton, he's a very vertically gifted individual. He's taller than I am. And so this is a pretty big mound. And it was a mound that had been broken into in the 1980s by a local rock hunter with a backhoe. And actually this area right here is the remains of one of those backhoe cuts. And what we did in 2019 is we laid out a series of excavation units here that were working primarily in that backhoe cut, but then would expose a thin face of the original mound profile to learn something about the construction sequence of this portion of the site. And over the course of 2 weeks, we excavated those units down to where by the end we had a consistent profile face coming down this side of those units, which we then had a big profile drawing party to document everything that we were seeing in the soil. And then came to the stunning realization that we had to put all the dirt back up the hill at the end. And thank goodness for Paul Knapp, Steve Jacober, and a bunch of other folks who figured out a clever pulley system to put all that stuff back. Then we came back in from the field and took the documentation that we have of the profile faces, dropped them into some mapping software, and collected the soil profile information, use those photographs for a little bit of verification where I needed. And we have, as a result of that field work, a complete profile face for that mound A, which when we look at it a little closer, you can see we have the soil colors keyed out based on the Munsell system. And what I think we were able to identify at that point during that field project is basically the original mound surface and then two other surfaces within the mound. This gives us our first good stratigraphic look at that portion of the mound. It's a very difficult piece of work to pull off, but it was done quite well. Alongside that work, we had a real heavy emphasis on lab work. And in the lab, this was an opportunity to move forward a project that lay dormant for a very long period, and that we are going to be making a massive leap in this summer, because we are starting to deal with our collections from Holman Springs, which is, we'll call it famous within the histories of training program digs as the site that was more sherds than dirt. And so we'll go back to the slide. See Locksburg Mounds on the Costat, Holman Springs over on the Rolling Fork. And it's in the Rolling Fork River Valley, but actually it's not on the main flow of the Rolling Fork. What it sits adjacent to is this brackish salt marsh. The Caddo homeland sits on top of some of the few naturally occurring salt deposits in the United States, and the groundwater that comes through creates this sort of briny pond. The site sits immediately adjacent to it, and so what the site is it was not a mound center like Locksburg was. It wasn't a place where people came to celebrate and perform the vital rituals to keep the world in balance. Holman Springs was a salt processing site. It was a place where you could pull the salty water out of the pond, evaporate the water out, and be left behind a collection of salt, which they could then be traded out to the Great Plains or to the east, places where they didn't have naturally occurring salt deposits. And this was such a significant aspect of the site, and the site was so focused on its construction that or on its production, that when Frank Schambach first visited Holman Springs in 1968, this is what the site looked like. And I know what we need to focus on here is this is the mound coming across. And this is a fellow from DeQueen, a guy by the name of Ernest Seibert, who introduced Frank to a lot of the sites in the area. And what he's standing on is essentially about a 10-foot tall mound that was composed almost entirely of broken pottery, because a lot of that pottery is basically big bowls and salt pans where they would collect water, create salt in there, and then break the pot and create this giant basically waster pile. It's a lot different from a lot of the other mounds that we see elsewhere in the native Southeast, where we don't think this was primarily a ceremonial structure. This was a giant pile of broken pottery. Now, the site doesn't look like that anymore. Sometime in the mid to late 1970s, a lot of the mound was bulldozed away. I've heard stories that the mound was used in part to create fill for the DeQueen Little League fields. I've heard stories, possibly apocryphal, about kids playing outfield during Little League games and getting inattentive and going hunting for arrowheads instead of chasing fly balls. But so the site doesn't look like this anymore. It's a lot flatter. But significant is that we had the 1985 and the 1986 training programs here, and they produced an absolute gigantic load of artifacts. Both years they used the Tyson chicken truck to bring all the stuff back to Magnolia. It was a collection that constituted over 430 boxes of artifacts. It was just absolutely huge. And it was a collection that it is our ethical duty to analyze and publish on, but the amount of time it would take for the station staff, or even the station staff and a few volunteers to sort of go through would it would literally be decades of work. And so in 2019, alongside the field component that we had at Locksburg Mounts, we also had a large group of very dedicated society volunteers took an advanced laboratory class with a focus on catoceramics from Dr. Mary Beth Trubitt, supported by Dr. Bob Scott. And they basically spent 2 weeks going through just an absolutely gigantic mass of artifacts. And to underscore their accomplishment, they took this collection of 432 boxes of unprocessed material and reduced it down to 78 boxes that remained to be done. And in the process, they analyzed almost 93,000 sherds, which, because Mary Beth made sure that everything got weighed, came to 1,669.2 pounds of material, which, to give you some feel for what that translates into, that is about the average weight of an adult male bison. That's a lot of stuff. That's an absolutely amazing accomplishment that people that got this done. And looking at the data that came out of that, just some very broad brush stuff. It is overwhelmingly shell tempered pottery, which would probably make it a little, which suggests that the site dates 12 to 1300 or later. And it is also dominated by coarsewares. We get some salt pans. The one you see here is actually from another site in I believe Clark County. But you get a lot of these sort of big plain pottery sherds. There are some fine wares in there, and there are a handful of salt pan sherds in there as well. I generally think that the pans predate the bowls that we were finding, so it gives us an idea that maybe we have some chronological span. And then we also have within these collections, it's primarily undecorated wares. There are some decorated ones, and then when we look at the decorations, most of the decoration seems to be punctated, and then there are some other styles. And a lot of the things that fall under the punctated category are basically portions of jars that have these sort of large, sort of spudged over punctates around them, which correspond quite nicely with a couple of Caddo types, one of which is called Nash neck banded, seen here on the left. It is generally thought to be to date between the 1400s and the 1700s. And interestingly, a lot of the literature out there on Nash neck banded says that it is unknown in Arkansas and Louisiana, only Texas. But here we have a large volume of it showing up here. So already we're seeing something that's not in the books. We also see some types that would correspond to this type here, is known as McKinney Plain. And that dates generally a little earlier than Nash neck banded. So again, we're seeing maybe some evidence that there's some chronological space in here. Amongst the kind of fineware ceramics, we have documented examples of Avery engraved, which is a late Caddo period type. I see a full portion here. There are also some type specimens of Kino trailed and piece brushed and incised, which Kino trailed is another late Caddo type. Piece brushed and incised is generally thought to be a little earlier, so chronological spread. So that's what we came out of 2019 with. Now, 2020, we were planning to go back and do more on both of these sites. But as you all know, some things came up, and we had to find ways to research both of these sites without being able to actually go in the field. And one of the things that I'm sort of fascinated by that we happen across is a set of photographic data from what's called the National High Altitude Photography Program, which is kind of like Google Earth before Google Earth was a thing. And this was an effort spearheaded by the U.S. Geological Survey in the 1980s to collect nationwide cloud-free aerial imagery at consistent elevations and resolutions. And they happened to overfly Southwest Arkansas in 1980, 1981, 1984, and 1985, which is handy to me because I mentioned that Locksburg Mounds had been heavily looted in the 1980s by a local relic hunter. And when we zoom in on the site from above, you can actually see in the succeeding years the evidence of that work. So this is the 1980 image. And you can see this is an infrared. So the red is chlorophyll. And so where you see these white marks, these are relic hunter pits that are disturbing the vegetation around the mounds. In 1981, you can see that they've moved on. They're focusing. This is on, I believe, Mound J. It's out, or Mound H. That's out over here. Essentially, totally remove that one. You can see they've got some other pits going. When we come back to them in 1984, you can see they're cutting big areas open here. This is the Mound E area where we had basic excavation in 2019. This was getting into that region. And what we see in these long stripes being cut through here is in talking with some of the folks who are involved in this, they said, well, you know, when they did what they wanted to do with the mounds, they started cutting trenches trying to find cemeteries. Now they're looking for more pots to sell. And so this is, we can actually see that in the data, which is fascinating to see, a little disheartening to see just how heavily disturbed the site had been. And then by 1985, we can see that a lot of the damage has subsided. We know from historical accounts that the relic hunters believe that they basically hunted the site out at that point, and they were apparently advertising in Dallas newspapers that you could come up on a artifact digging trip, and they were hoping to get businessmen to shell out a couple bucks to come and find stuff. So sort of the end of that disturbance, which gives us a really great window onto what had happened to Locksburg Mounds. And our original plan for the 2022 training program was to finish the Holman Springs data analysis and then go back to Locksburg Mounds and do some more excavations on the big platform mound and at the Mound E where we've been working before, using that NHAP imagery as a support to that, and have this as third time's a charm, because obviously 2020 didn't work, 2021 didn't come together either, and then so 2022 had our fingers crossed, third time's a charm, and everything was looking good for going out to Locksburg Mounds. And then around about the start of last month, the land sold and we no longer have access permission to be out there. So we are reorienting, and what follows from here on out is basically the new plan. And it is the new plan only for the field program. I want to emphasize that most of the logistics, the laboratory portion, all that stuff is as it has been described in the past. We're just simply shifting the excavation portion someplace else. And we're shifting it to Holman Springs, which will be out from June 4th to 18th. Anyone who is a society member and wants to come and join in, we're eager to have you come out and participate. And for context on what we're going to be doing, we will start off with this gorgeous map done by the 1984 Society Training Program mapping class, which in 84, they were over at Historic Washington State Park, and Anne Early brought the mapping class out and showed, taught folks how to, map a site at Holman Springs. And this has been one of our guiding templates. So many thanks to Dr. Early and her volunteers in creating this for us. And what we have here basically is we have the salt marsh here, and then this area of slightly higher elevation here is the remains of the mound that haven't been scooped away. And in between like 2017 and 2019 and the run up to this, Fiona Taylor, the former station assistant, and I digitized a bunch of the records and georeferenced what was done back in the 1980s, and gives us a window on what was dug back then. Sort of gets us to so what our starting point is for the summer. And so within looking at those records, we have, this was the area that people working under Frank's direction were focused on. And we're going to drop the background out and we'll zoom in. And with all those records pulled together, you have the excavation units shown here with the documented features shown here. And this is a really great data set for all the information that is recorded. One of the difficulties in interpreting the data from the 80s at the time was that no one had ever dug a Caddo salt site of this size before. And one of the things that took place after this was Anne Early dug the Holman Spring, or the Hardman site outside Arkadelphia, which gives us a comparative example that gives us also a little bit of a starting place to proceed. Now, the advantage that she had with Hardman was that was bulldozer stripped by the highway department because they're doing some road expansion in the area. And when we look at the excavation unit map here, you can see we've got some areas where you have sort of large contiguous areas that can help you see some of the patterns, but there are some a couple gaps in there. And so what we're planning on doing this coming summer is focusing on filling in some of these gaps and making it a more consistent look at the site. And so what you see here, the areas shown in red are going to be our areas of primary focus. Blue is secondary, green is going to be tertiary. And these black squares in here are units that I've identified to re-excavate. One of the things that we don't have from the 1980s are ending excavation depths on some of the units. And so by doing a quick re-excavation of those units, that will allow us to get to the bottoms of them and then allow us to then sort of knit all the associated strata back into one common datum. So we'll have that as well. But with starting with the red squares, then going to the blue, and then going to the green, that'll help us fill in or get a fuller picture of the feature patterns and help us interpret the overall portion of the site. And so for those of y'all who will be out there, if you take our basic excavation class, we're going to stick in what I'm referring to as area 1. This area 2 will be down here, and then we call this area 3. So that is going to be our the field portion. It should be a lot of artifacts coming out of the ground, frankly. We are working in the area that earned the site the moniker more sherds than dirt. So this will not be like Locksburg, where there are very few things coming out of the field. It's likely this is going to be a lot of things to pull. And it will be, that will be a challenge to keep up with in the lab, because the lab will be tasked with keeping track of keeping up with that as well as possible, while also finishing the analysis on Holman Springs from 85 and 86. So hopefully we'll get that whole data set together. And we're also going to be sending collections from the Bayou Cell site, which Frank Schambach dug on in 1968, which Bayou Cell is not anywhere near DeQueen. It's not in the Little River region. It is not even in my station territory. So why, do you ask, am I sending this? Well, Bayou Cell, as the Francophones in the room might guess from the cell, it's another salt site. And one of the things that the Society demonstrated by its work with the Holman Springs collection in 2019 is that y'all are amassing the knowledge of how to process cathode ceramics, particularly salt ceramics, well enough that I feel perfectly comfortable and trusting with this data analysis. And so the Bayou Cell collection is another one that needs completion. So this is an opportunity for us to move forward and do some really important work in the time afforded us. And so we'll have the lab will be in full swing again. Dr. Trubit will be our lab director and will also be teaching the advanced lab course again. We will be meeting at the UA Cossatot. It will be our lab space and our morning gathering location. It's a less than 10-minute drive from the site, so the logistics are going to be quite easy. We will be having seminars. I mentioned the cathode ceramics class with Dr. Trubit. We'll be having both basic excavation and basic laboratory, both weeks. So Gary Knudsen and Katie Gregory will be teaching basic excavation, and Katie will be not getting a lot of sleep because she's also teaching basic lab week 1, and Dr. Michelle Rath-Gabriel will be teaching it week 2, and then Dr. Bob Scott will be teaching site survey, and that's week 2, and Dr. Julie Morrow will be teaching lithic analysis week 1. So we have those offerings. They should be good and informative and instructive, and just be great to be getting the band back together. The camping location, should you choose to want to camp, will be back at DeQueen Lake. It's gorgeous. And I am shamelessly using the fall foliage picture as added inducement to come join in. But it's a great campsite. It's been refreshed recently. It's easy access, and checked it last week. If you're on Verizon, the cell service is improved from 2019. So good on that. Should you want to join in, if you're not already registered, you can find the event online at the Arkansas Archaeological Society's website. Get your registrations in to Maryland as soon as you can. And recognizing that this pivot is a little bit last minute and requiring a little bit of a added assistance. One of the things, Taylor Green and I, the station assistant here at SAU, we've been out a couple times this week, brush clearing out on the site. It's fairly grown up, and we made a big dent in it, but we could use some assistance this weekend. So on Saturday, we will gratefully accept any and all assistance that we can get to go out. And if you have a personal vendetta against foliage, there's a chance for you to exercise that a little bit. We have some grass trimmers and swing blades that we'll bring out, but we need some help clearing off the site for a gradiometer survey that I'm going to do next week to help guide the excavations a little more. So if you have an interest in coming and helping out, I will be very deeply appreciative. We'll meet at the meet at UA Casatat at 10 o'clock, and then I'll lead you out to the site and stay as long as you want, but we'll be out by 2 is the plan. So again, if you want to join in, or if you have any other questions, you can contact me by email or by phone. And if you have any questions about what you heard tonight, I'm glad to field them. Oh, and the site survey seminar class with Dr. Scott is a that is going out and learning how to find sites, not excavate sites that we know about. So that we'll be doing some shovel testing and some other sort of preliminary level work. It's a very important part of the fieldwork component, and it's a very needed and useful class. No question about that.
It is. It's really important.
And Bob is a great person to learn that from. He's got a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah.
And had another question. If you only want to work in the lab, that is just fine. We have a handful of people who that's how they want to engage with archaeology. So you just the registration form, I believe, has a space for you to indicate how you want to be involved. Yeah,
it's a preference. It's I prefer lab. You can just check it.
Yeah, there's, like I said, there's a handful of people who that's their part.
That's what they want to do. Yeah.
And we had another question about a gear list for people who want to be involved. Marilyn, do you have something like that you've had in the past?
Well, traditionally, the first packet comes out that after people register, there is some suggested items, and it's listed, and a lot of those will be they'll be available at the training program. Yeah. But you can buy them on your own, but
yeah, and as far as shovels and trowels and that kind of thing, we have all that on hand. That it's mostly personal gear items that you'd need to be concerned about.
Yeah, but if you want your own trowel, because a lot of people do after they get out in the field, and they're like, I want my own trowel, and it'll be available. So. Yeah.
Yeah, so any kind of text or reading material for the classes is, Marilyn, is that provided by the to the students who register for them?
Everything, it should be on the society's website. Okay. And all you got to do is go there. If you want to sign up, you'll have to be a member, and then you can click on the training program membership thing, and then you'll get the full ability to sign up. But anytime that you want to talk to me, just send me an email, It's pretty easy, although my email is pretty complicated. It's mxj02@uark.edu.
Yeah, Marilyn, could you put that in the chat maybe?
I'll try.
And she's also all over the